Cody for coming.
How are you this evening, Mrs. Benson?
Good evening. It is September 25th, 2012 at the 7 p.m. North Kingstown School Committee business meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and would everyone rise to say the pledge to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for us all. Lorraine, could you please call the roll?
Linda Avanzado.
Here.
Melvoyd Benson.
Here.
Don Bascardin.
Here.
Larry Cerisi.
Here.
William Mudge.
Here.
Kimberly Page.
Here.
Richard Welsh. Julia Held. Here. Thank you.
Lorraine, could you please also tell us what is on the calendar for the next few weeks?
September 26th, Yom Kippur, schools closed. October 2nd, 9 a.m., policy subcommittee meeting. October 8th, Columbus Day, schools and offices closed. October 9th, 7 p.m., school committee work session, North Kingstown High School. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ajay, I'll turn it over to you for the presentation.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Patty Pizzullo and Kathleen Perry. Kathleen Perry is our new Assistant Director of Pupil Personnel. As you know, Dr. Pizzullo is the Director of Pupil Personnel. I've asked them tonight to give a presentation basically giving us a profile of special education in the North Kingstown School Department. As you all know, I mean, special education is a big part of what we do in the North Kingstown School Department, and I think it's important to completely, for this group in particular, to really understand exactly what we mean when we talk about special education and what is, you know, the profile of these services in our district. So I'll pass it right along.
Comfortable for you, it's certainly comfortable for me, it's comfortable for the audience. It would work very well. The reason
you may need a mic.
Do I need a mic?
Can she do the handheld, or there we go.
You might just we will be able to hear you, but the audio won't be able to pick you up without the mic.
We got something coming for you.
Thank you. Is this okay?
Yeah.
All right. So it'll be comfortable for me, and I hope it's comfortable for everyone else, and they can hear me clearly. And I'm going to be going through what Kathy and I have worked on and put together as a profile of special education in North Kingstown. This data was pulled together in August, and this is data that we will look at on a regular basis throughout the school year. Periodically, we will do this type of analysis. I'm going to be going through each of the slides, and you will notice, and I apologize, that a couple of the slides are distorted, not in your handout, but they will be distorted here, and that has to do with the fact that my computer at home is not at the level of the computers here at work. So when I set it up on my computer at home and I bring it here, it cannot adjust it. So, folks, let's begin, and I'm going to introduce some terms for you to look at and think about, and we will discuss as we go on. I want you to think about the heterogeneity of the disabilities that you're going to see displayed in some of these signs, and by that I mean under IDEA there are 13 identified disabilities, and what we look at in terms of heterogeneity is looking at the number of disabilities that are represented in a school, because that has an impact on the resources that that school may need to meet the needs of its children. The second piece of information that we're going to be looking at is pre-kindergarten, the impact of our pre-kindergarten programs across the grades. We're just beginning to field them. We have over 80 children in our kindergarten classes. Some of those children are children who have been identified under IDEA, while other children in those classes are children that we call community peers. But we do serve over 80 children in our preschool classrooms. We seem to be growing by leaps and bounds. Sometimes I hold my breath, and Kathy is holding her breath when we get new ones that are referred to us, and we always worry about what are the needs of this child. We want to meet the needs of this child, and what do we have to do to put those structures in place that the child may need. And then the third piece of information that I think is important for us to look at is the poverty level in the district. And that's something that folks don't readily see and don't always realize, but that has an impact on school resources as well. And then the last part of this presentation will take a look at the NECAP performance, 3-year and 7-year trends across the grade span. What does it look like? How do we compare special education achievement with regular education achievement? How are our children doing? And this, in essence, sets the framework for the work that Kathy and I are going to be doing and focusing on for this school year, at least we begin it. So, special education in Kingstown looks a little bit like this, and it's really clear that it's not focused. I think that's clear. It looks like this, and I'm very proud to say that we service 90% of our students are serviced in district. 90% are serviced in district, and I think that's wonderful and something we should be very proud of. We keep our children home. 187 students at the high school have IEPs. 53 children in Davisville Middle have IEPs. 17 children in Whitford Middle have IEPs. 80 in Fishing Cove. 40 in Forest Park. 33 in Hamilton. 31 in Stony Lane. 49 in Quid. And then there were 53 children placed out of district. Now, if you just look at the numbers, you may think, well, we can certainly make some decisions based on these numbers, and we certainly can make decisions based on these numbers, but that is not a wise thing to do, because these numbers represent different disabilities and different levels of disabilities at the different grade levels. And that's what I mean by heterogeneity. So let's take a look. This is Fishing Cove. This is a profile of Fishing Cove. And this is the number of students in each of the disability categories. So if we look at speech and language, SPL, right, in Fishing Cove there are 30 children receiving speech and language services. 30. There are 8 children, 8 under autism. I think 1 child blind, visually impaired. 28 children under the heading of DD, developmentally delayed. And that's a very interesting category because that's going to shift as the child gets older. 7 under the label of learning disabled. 1 each for deaf, hearing impaired, emotionally disturbed. Other health impaired, and again, another very interesting category because it seems to be a catch-all. Other health impaired, very typically, you would find children who are diagnosed with attention deficit disorder under that category. So that can be that can carry a lot of impact. And then orthopedic, 2 children with orthopedic disability under Fishing Cove. So when we look at this, we see there are 10 categories of the 13 categories of learning disabled represented in Fishing Cove, and that's quite a high number. And this is one of the distortions, and I apologize, so I direct your attention to your handout rather than to the what's projected on the wall. So once again, we're looking at Forest Park, and in Forest Park there are 8 disability categories that are represented. 12 of them are speech and language. 5 of them are autistic, children identified on the spectrum. 5 are developmentally delayed. 1 deaf, hearing impaired. 2 children, other health impaired. 1 child intellectually disabled, 13 labeled LD, 1 labeled multi-handicap. So again, we have a range of children, but certainly not the heterogeneity that we saw when we were looking at Vision Code. Yes, it has a solid representation under IDEA, but it does not have that right. Then we turn again and we look at Hamilton, AP. Now we're back to being clear. Hamilton has 5 disability categories represented. And again, I'm going to caution you to think about the heterogeneity of the disabilities, the number of disabilities represented in the school, because that is what is important in terms of resource and in terms of identifying need. 20 children identified as having speech and language impairment, 4 as autistic, 2 as developmentally delayed, 2 as other health impaired. Remember, that was a difficult category because it carries a lot of definitions under it, ADHD being one of them, and then 5 children identified as having learning disability. Stony Lane. Stony Lane has 5 disability categories represented in its schools. And Stony Lane's largest category is speech and language. Autism, there are 3 children, I believe. Am I reading that too? Yes, 3 children. Blind and visually impaired, 1 child. Developmentally delayed, 2. LD, 4. 4 children identified under the category of visually disabled. Again, the distortion, and I apologize, that's my old computer trying to interface with the district's newer software. But your handout is correct, so I direct your attention to the handout. And for QUID, we have 7 categories represented, 27 children under speech and language, 2 children under the autism spectrum category, 12 children under developmentally delayed, 1 child under emotionally disturbed, 2 child under other health impaired, and that's that difficult category that has many definitions under it, 1 child under intellectually disabled or mentally retarded, and 4 children under LD. And that is the picture of disability for QUID. We're moving now to the middle school, and here in the middle school, although we had a number of children identified under the developmentally delayed category in the elementary schools, we're not going to see it here. And the reason why we're not going to see it here is by regulation. When a child turns 9, a decision has to be made. When a child carries the category, the disability category of developmentally delayed, the decision has to be, is that child intellectually impaired? Does that child have a learning disability? Does that child have a speech and language impairment, language processing impairment? So developmentally delayed changes and moves into other categories. We don't just say, oh, you're not disabled anymore, oh, you don't have a problem anymore, but we have to look at it, and the federal government and the state give us time to look at it, because that's what's so important. They give us the time to look at it so we see how the child is progressing and learning in the classroom, how they're responding to instruction, and then we can make a more informed decision about exactly what it is we're looking at when we watch that child learn, benefit from instruction. So developmentally delayed disappears around about age 9, and we have the middle school profile for DNS. 8 categories of disability out of the 13 represented in DNS. 19 LD, 6 speech and language, 1 multi-handicapped, and 4 autistic, 9 emotionally disturbed, 2 deaf and hearing impaired, 10 other health impaired. And suddenly that number is increasing in that category, because we begin to see the effects, the impact of attention deficit disorder when the curriculum places more demands on the child in the work. And we see what happens when those demands are increased. And then 2, intellectually disabled, mentally retarded. Woodford Middle, very different middle school, right? Now you can see the difference. Woodford Middle, 4 categories are represented. They have 17 children who are identified as having a disability in Woodford Middle. The majority of the children in Woodford Middle carry a disability label of learning disabled, 1 speech and language. And that's quite different from the other schools. Only 1 child there that has a label of speech and language, 1 emotionally disturbed, and 4 other health impaired. 4 other health. Very, very different type of a population with respect to disabilities than we see in Davisville Bay. Very, very different. And that's why I mentioned to you the heterogeneity of the disability profile becomes very important. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Can we ask, should we wait till the end to ask questions? Doctor, what's up?
Ask you questions other than that.
Go ahead, Mr. Busgarden. As long as, we want to keep, I'm going to let you ask your question, but I will say that let's make sure that we keep as much of the presentation going, and if you can wait till the end, wait, but if not, ask now.
No, I can wait. Thank you.
No, you go ahead, since I already said this.
So, again, very different profile between Woodford Middle and Davisville Middle. Again, once again, my apologies for the poor interface between my computer and the school's computer. So I direct your attention to the handout. We're looking at the high school now, and the handout has a clear graphic representation. In the high school, we have 8 categories represented, 187 children identified in the high school for having a disability, 95 learning disabled. Orthopedically handicapped and speech and language have very low numbers, 1 and 2 respectively, I believe. 16 children diagnosed on the spectrum of autism, 24 with emotional disturbance, 1 child with deaf and who's deaf and has hearing impairment, 33 other health impaired. Again, notice the jump because the curriculum and the demands of the curriculum are changing, and that category of attention deficit disorder really has a strong impact then on the children and their learning. 14 intellectually disabled or mentally retarded. Okay. Next page is a full district-wide view. Let's hope. All right, it worked. Okay. This gives you a picture of the whole district. This is a district-wide view. 11 disability categories out of the 13 are represented. 11 are represented across here. And you can see the numbers. Speech and language, high. Learning disabled, high numbers. Other health impaired, high numbers. Developmentally delayed. It's represented here because it's picking up those children from the elementary school who hadn't yet turned 9. And that is a very high number here also. And then a little bit lower for emotionally disturbed. Others have very small numbers, very low incidence, as they say. So hold this thought in mind, and let's take a look now. Let's take a look now at the poverty levels of our schools. Now, I want to remind you all that when poverty levels are taken, we don't look at preschool. They look at K to 5. So we're not looking. They're not looking at preschool at all for these poverty levels.
This is not related to the disabilities at all, is it?
This is not related to disabilities at all. This is poverty levels in our schools. Some of these children, that's a good point.
Do they fall in both categories?
Some of these children could easily fall in both categories. Okay. So what we have in QUID, we have slightly over 50% of that population of children are at the poverty level in Gwinnessett. That has a real strong impact on the school and its resources and its supports, because poverty affects the readiness level of a child entering school on so many different levels. So I think it's important for us to really look at that poverty level to see what's happening within our school, and it helps us shape a picture and frame a picture in terms of what are the resources that are needed for these children. A little over 31% in Fish and Cove, slightly over 21% in Forest Park, about 12.5% in Hamilton, about 10.5% in Stony Lane, a little over 24% in Davisville Middle. Woodford Middle, about 11.5%. Almost twice as many children of poverty in Davisville Middle. Once again, okay, what is it saying about resources and need in that school? That's important to keep in mind. The high school, slightly over 14%. District-wide, the poverty rate district-wide is about 19%. And that's something that we watch carefully because, as I said, it impacts the revenue of the children.
Are these folks all on free and reduced lunches?
Yeah, they would be. That's how it is. Now let's take a look in another direction, because with all of this data, so you say, okay, so what does it all really mean? Okay, and what do we do with it? All right, let's look at it, and let's look at the kneecap scores. What do the kneecap scores look like across time and grades? And then we're going to reduce the kneecap score, something that Kathy and I do, bring it down to an individual student level so that we can really take a look at individual student achievement and what it's saying in terms of what that child is doing. This is a comparison of special and regular students achieving proficiency on the kneecap reading test for years 5 to 11. And when we look at it, the red line on top, the top line, I don't know if you have color, but the top line are regular education students who are proficient at level 3 and 4. Okay? 3, I believe, is proficient, 4 is with distinction. And we've got a nice representation of our regular ed students. If you look at some of those percentages, you're going to be proud of that. But then we look down at the blue line, and that blue line represents our special education students who have achieved level 3 and 4. I think it's wonderful that they have, but there is a gap there, and it's that gap that will give us a lot of concern, and it's that gap where we have to focus. In other words, what we have to do is close the gap, and we're not going to close the gap by bringing the red line down and sending the blue line up. We're going to close that gap by raising the blue line to meet the red line. In other words, we have to address that achievement gap in our children in reading.
What happened between 10 and 11?
Why it dropped down to 20 and then
50 to 29?
Mm-hmm. I haven't analyzed it at that level, but I will. I'll give you, next time I'll try to get an answer for you, because I asked the same question, but I haven't gone into it at that level yet.
Conversely, what made it go from 20 to 50?
Yeah. So you see, this type of data, knowing the differences in disability representation in the school, and then keeping that in mind and factoring in this type of information, you really have a lot of questions that it raises. What happened? Why? How can we change it? What will we do about it?
This way, and average those out.
Even if you track the cohort, like this is all the grades, if you track a cohort, like if you track that 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade, you can see whether there's, how that group of students is performing over time. So that could explain some of this jump here. You might see a grade that has consistently been doing more poorly than another grade, or a grade that's been doing consistently higher. Sometimes if you look at it and cross-check it, you get those gaps, but we can look at that and see what happens. Because this is the whole district, not a cohort of kids.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Page. I have to ask a question. Do you find tracking these numbers the way they're tracked now to be just an exercise? Because it seems to me it would be more important to follow the kids through the class, cohorts, as you to put in your term. I mean,
You're right, Rick. This gives us a global picture, and what you're saying is, can we focus down to the individual student level and see what it means? And I'll show you that. We can. There's a way to do that.
I would think that would help you to be able to figure out where your deficiencies are in curriculum or teaching methods to make sure everything is moving in the right direction.
Exactly. So we do have to always look at this level, but then that doesn't mean we stop there. We certainly will then look lower with more focus and really begin.
And that lower level that you're talking about helps direct like that targeted instruction to accelerate that gap. That's what we would use to know how to target that instruction and what to do to accelerate that learning. So.
And many of the schools are involved in this where they have their data team meetings and they really look at individual classes and children in those classes and how they are achieving and how they are progressing. What is the growth? So they are looking very, very carefully. I'm just giving folks a profile. This is reading. Okay. Now, this is the children not achieving proficiency on the reading test across those years. And once again, we have the gap. But this time, special education students are on top. More of the special education students are not achieving proficiency. And then fewer of the regular education students are not achieving proficiency. We want to close the gap, okay? This time we're going to think of closing the gap by lowering that blue line. We want fewer children not achieving proficiency. This is math. This is a picture of regular education students at the proficient 3-4 level and a picture of special education students proficient at the 3-4 level, okay? And as you look at 2005, my gosh, things were really, 2005, things seemed to be coming together, but then all of a sudden a lot changed. And exactly what changed, I can't answer just yet, but a little more time, we'll get to it. Kathy and I will work on it. But the gap is there, and the gap seems to be persistent across the timeline, and that's what is disturbing. That's what we have to address.
Is this consistent with the state, data?
Yes.
Yeah, see, so it's more than just
Yes.
It's more than
within
just.
your control.
It's not just us.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are many districts across the state and across the nation addressing these needs. What does it say? What does it do? And that's what we should be doing. This is a picture of regular and special education students not achieving proficiency on the math. And again, we've got a flip-flop. Regular education is lower in terms of those not achieving, but special education still maintains its high percentages. And the gap, you just look at the gap. You don't even have to look at the percentages. Just look at the gap, and you know that we have a lot of work to do here. Okay. 2011, at least the trend was upward, and I'm pleased with that. Okay. The trend is moving in the right direction, so that gives me a little bit of comfort.
It's not right.
The writing test.
Not achieving it.
Again, a picture of in 07, 10, and 11. This is a picture of regular
25
ed
is not
students.
achieving, no, 52 is not achieving.
Special ed students at the bottom who have achieved proficiency in writing. And the gap is still there, and all of a sudden in 2011, the gap is widening, and that's concerning. That has to do with writing skills. Now, writing skills are really interesting because writing is a synthetic skill. It's a combination of a lot of other skills that come together to produce good writing. So we have to look at that in terms of, it's not just writing a sentence, but it's really pulling together ideas. That's what we really look at when we ask children to write. Yes, we teach the mechanics of English, but we also are looking at ideas, generation of ideas, and kids being able to express themselves with those ideas. So we have a gap here that is...
If you look, each year they measure a different type of writing. So if you see the dip in both that went down to regular and special ed, every time they give the recap, it's a different type of writing. So that would indicate to me that that type of writing as a whole in the district was something that we're going to look at, because writing is very specific for that year. It's not a global assessment of writing. It might be a persuasive piece. It might be a narrative piece. It might be a procedural piece. So depending on what type of piece that was, you'll see that it dipped in both areas. So that kind of would be a clue to look at too.
But aren't we pre-noticed that they're going to change the scores?
No.
It's got to be ready all the time, all right?
Anytime.
We want our students to be ready.
It's
I noticed that, and do we not have one method does our curriculum, because even if that test changes from year to year, for the regular classroom teacher and for the special ed, the special population, do we not have a style of writing that is required for all teachers to do?
What we have is a writing process that we teach, beginning with the generation of an idea, beginning with the organization of those thoughts, beginning with putting those thoughts on paper, and then as the children get older, finding facts that support those, and then we also teach the mechanics. We don't necessarily have one style, okay, but what we do have is the writing process, and we teach that from early on by having the children generate ideas and do writing in their journal. Just a sentence or two to get them thinking in terms of writing, and to get them to reflect a little bit on things they saw that they liked, things that they did that they enjoyed, and bringing it into the classroom. So I can't say it's a style, but I can clearly say it's the writing process that is taught for upper grade.
In the curriculum, there's two types. You have the PERMA method.
Oh, okay. I know.
Now you see where I'm getting at. And when I looked at these things, and I would see the regular student without anything in that category wouldn't be, as you say, I wrote the word down, the gap. And the gap is not broad enough. Is it because you have one-on-one with special education? What is this telling us about the regular student and the writing and the math? Because it all seems to go together. And you continue to use the word gap, close the gap.
Yes, I do, because when I talk writing, I'm not talking the formation of letters. What I'm talking about is the generation of ideas.
That's what I'm talking about, too.
And I'm talking about the organization of those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And children, that really, you can look at it, and you must look at it almost as a developmental skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just synthetic, but it's really a developmental skill. So we really have to look at the performance of our special education children and the performance of our regular education children together, because maybe we have to do something a little bit differently for our special education children than we do for the regular education children. There are many approaches to this, and that's something that we have to look at.
It looks as though, because I mentioned this fact at a school committee, I think 2 weeks ago, about the importance of writing, and it seems as though our special ed kids and our regular kids, when you look at this and you go through ideas and you have read different things about special education and this, that, and that, do you think we are putting too much emphasis in the realm of saving money by saying we do all in-house? And are we equipped at the schools to do the things that they would do at a Meeting Street school, at a Sargent school, so forth? Because that's been a trend. We keep them in-house. And your last page, I'll let you finish. I have a question for that.
I'll comment.
Okay.
Once again, children not achieving on the writing test, and we just get the inverse of what we saw earlier. Again, 2011, as Kathy pointed out, it might have been a different type of writing, but our children special ed children with special needs. So what do we do about this? And I think this answers your question, John. One of the things that we do is we really reduce the data to the individual student level, and taking just grade 5, just some selected students in grade 5, what we did was take a look at the individual achievement of those students in reading, and we broke down what is tested in reading, and then we looked at how each child did, so that it gives us a profile of that child in every one of those categories of reading that are tested. And I think that's important to do, because that's where you sit down with your teams in the school and you really look at where shall we put the focus. And that's what the data teams are actually doing in the school. For example, student FJ, okay, clearly the blue is word vocabulary. Clearly there has to be focus on word vocabulary. We need to take a look at that child and really focus on word vocabulary, because that's going to be important for that child as that child progresses. Now that doesn't mean it's going to take a whole year for that child to improve vocabulary, but clearly we have to focus on it and give that child that intense instruction.
Is there a similarity or relationship between the type of disability, the 10 types that you speak to, with respect to the performance?
Absolutely.
So you can, okay.
Yes.
Oh,
But, okay.
that's
so-
kind of technical,
That's a good question. It is.
yeah.
And that's why looking at the heterogeneity of the disability in the school is
Precisely.
important. So, what is it saying? Preliminary analysis. Clearly, the impact of our pre-K programs is going to be significant as they go through the grades. It's going to change how we look at needs and how we have to prepare and structure our needs. The areas with the greatest demand, first, speech and language. Okay? Now, speech and language, everyone understands speech, but you have to understand language, because that's the bigger impact. That's information processing. They may have a disability, but they have difficulty processing language. It's really a language impairment, and that is significant, because that has an impact on a child's achievement and how they progress. LD in speech and language the highest. Then we have children on the spectrum, developmentally delayed, which morphs at age 9, and then other health impaired, and then we have the other big category is emotionally disturbed. We have to look at the poverty level, the demand that poverty level places on the resources of a school. Because of the readiness impact, those children are not necessarily always ready to begin where we think they should begin. So we've got a lot of work to do there. The differences among the schools, WRT, with respect to heterogeneity. How a school's heterogeneity impacts resources, the persistence of the achievement gap in reading, math, and writing. Clearly, we have to address that. The cumulative impact of the high school, in essence, all roads lead to Rome, and it's going to land in our high school. So again, we have to look at the needs of a high school. How is it changing? Programming there. And then the poverty level, it drops from 54.4% in quid to 14.4% at the high school. What happened and who's tracking that? And Kathy and I will be tracking that. We lost, if we were going to keep the same proportion, I think what it looks like is that we're losing about 5%. Now, who are those 5%? I don't know just yet. What happened to them? I don't know. Did they move? Probably. Could be. Some, not all. I have no idea. Okay? But that's something that we have to look at. Really, there. And then, following the data trends and changing needs, the implication for resource allocation in terms of space, staff and service providers, and support personnel. The implications for program development is huge. The implications for student achievement. We need expansions and added resources where? This is what the data is going to direct us to. And we need contraction and reduce and or change resources where? And that's where the data directs us to look. That's our task. And this year, more good news. Rhode Island Department of Education is visiting us October 22nd to October 25th. They're already in the schools looking at records, looking at compliance and service that we provide for the children. And they will be doing a comprehensive review of special education in North Kingstown. And actually, I would welcome that because what they do is help us focus, kind of tap us on the shoulder a little bit and say, hey, you need to be doing more in this area. And then with them as a resource, we sit down and write a plan. And I welcome that resource because they're usually people with a tremendous amount of experience.
Do they interface with the Special Ed Advisory Board?
Oh, yes, they do. They interface with
Very much so.
everyone. Yeah, Mr. March, not Child Law.
All right, so why don't we go down the table and everyone you can have an opportunity to ask Dr. Pizzullo and Kathleen Perry any questions you have. Ms. Perry, do you have your doctorate? Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't slight you. All right, so Mr. Sweesley, do you have anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank Dr. Pizzullo for the presentation. It was very informative, and I think it's helpful for not only the committee but the public as well, just for that overall general view of what's going on in special education. So thank you very much.
Mr. Welch.
Yes, I want to apologize for arriving late. I do appreciate all the effort that you gave us in this report, the little bit that I was here. And your responsibilities are certainly very great and important to us. I guess I don't share your optimism when RIDE comes in. They have done such a wonderful job at Central Falls and other places that I think you could possibly help them rather than the other way around. But thank you for your effort and your time tonight.
Mr. Bascarden.
Thank you. Dr. Pizzullo, early on, when you were talking about we had the pie charts about the different types of disabilities, and you made a point to show that the OHI from elementary school increased more than the amount of children that when it went to bumped to middle school, that number in middle school was larger than the combined elementary school, and even when you got to high school, I believe it was 33, and but it was still larger than the combined middle school. What is that something that gets tries to be identified in the students all along the education process? I mean, what makes that number get bigger? I mean, other than people moving into the district and so forth. I mean, what causes the number go from 4 in elementary school up to 14 in middle school?
For some of the categories to change.
Well, this was particularly the OHI as well. Yeah.
One of the things you have to look at is the shift in the curriculum, and then you have to look at the demands that are placed on a student as a student goes up in the grades, more independent work, not just reading at the concrete level for who, what, when, where, and why, but now you're reading for implied meanings and relationships, and I think that's what begins to happen. Some children that could do very well at this lower level, and then all of a sudden they're asked to do more with the text, with the content, and the pace is changing, and they're asked to be more independent. I think those are all very viable variables that impact the child's learning. And then when you have a child that may have a language-based learning disability, that is very significant because that impacts the child's ability to master the content, to even take it in, and they need different structures to be able to do that.
So the student could have had the diagnosis of ADHD, but it wouldn't have required an IEP until they're older, perhaps because they were accommodating or they had strategies and they were doing well in school. So they could have had the diagnosis, but they wouldn't need an IEP until the impact became greater.
I see. Okay.
So it's not that we have more of the kids identified, it's that they require something at that point that they might not have required earlier.
I follow you. Okay. And so are you going to, do you have a timeline when you're going to complete these studies, or is this an ongoing thing that we,
A timeline for?
To all the analyzation of all these numbers to find out what needs to be done and where? Is that, we learn more at the end of the school year, or is that like a 2-year process? What?
No, we will do this semester and then at the end of the school year, and we certainly can bring that information to you folks if you're interested. And it is something we work on every day as we are. Especially being involved with the teachers in the instruction in the classroom.
I think it would be helpful if when Dr. Pizzullo and her staff comes up with an impact statement, I guess, on what needs to go where and why, that would help us in our budgetary process to be able to look at their report and see the impact and find out what we need to do to make sure you're getting what you need to close, to shrink that gap, as you like to put it.
And that we are seeing the needs clearly, not just numbers, but really seeing what those numbers represent and the needs that they represent.
Yeah, and the cohort study, I find it would be for me, very interesting. I don't know if anybody else would, but just to see why we have those outliers of 50 and 05, and then the 50. I forget what graph it was. It was a line graph, but either meeting or not meeting, and what caused those outliers? Why was it so large and then bumped down? I mean, I realize the writing part could be something, but I find that kind of analyzation and almost being a sleuth, trying to figure out. It would be interesting to find out that information. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Buskard. Mrs. Benson.
I was quite interested, and I looked at the charts, and I thought about the configuration of the town, and I was very interested in the fact of the large numbers at Gwinnessett and the small numbers at some of the other middle schools like Hamilton.
Elementary school.
I'm on the elementary school now, like Hamilton. And I know, and the middle school, which the middle school for Gwinnessett would be Davisville, and the middle school for Hamilton would be Wickford. And I put those things together
Go ahead, Mrs. Benson.
with my knowledge of the geographics of the town and the way it was laid out. When we got a report last week or 2 weeks ago, I don't know when it was, Dr. O.J., but you pointed out the difference between Wickford and Davisville, how the scores had gone down. Then I looked at the feeder schools for those schools. And it was very disturbing to see that some things that happened at one middle school didn't happen at the other because it was the way the children had been parceled out.
It was poverty.
Poverty. And that effect about the last sheet about how poverty affects our school system. Some of those things were supposed to have taken place with our stimulus money.
There's a question in all of this.
This is America, was supposed to take place with our stimulus money in order to put teachers in those levels to bring up and close the gap. I'm concerned as much as you are, because if you look at the gap, we can see that special ed, it's a sad day in the court when the special ed kid, and those kids, as you say, when they have to be out, have to be in there by the age of 9, and the regular school is running almost neck to neck. But when we get to our high school, since we don't have but one, they all end up here. It's not that we would have a high school on this end of town and a high school on that end of town. We would be able to see those things. And then when we are told that the special ed kids will have to take the kneecap and that we have those things to do, maybe the fault are the things that you're saying that you are going to bring back to us. Maybe they should be looked at in other departments.
I think one of the
And the main point I'm getting at is how the children are spread out in the districts. Because, see, Fishing Cove would almost be a feeder school. That's what I call a feeder school, because you have them coming from everywhere. You got them going from everywhere to Gwinnessett, but the largest number.
Yeah, but
And you spoke about, this is my interest, and I'm going to finish. And you spoke about the many laws of FDA and how they go through them. And I don't see how you can really do all those laws. That handbook from special ed is that big. And they change it all the time. I get the material out of Washington from my department. You couldn't even have brought the notebook up here yourself tonight. So my question is, what we can do with getting out our districts and our boundaries for the buses and the children, because we know they're all going to end up at North Kingstown High School. And it's very sad to look at Gwinnessett as compared to Hammond. Almost 15 different. So are we giving the proper amount of staff in those schools? And that go along with the writing also.
And I think you make some good points. I think that is something we really have to look at as we walk down the path. But I also think something that's going to be important to us to look at is instead of comparing the special ed children, I think we ought to do that. But in addition to that, I think we ought to look at the growth that our special ed children are making. And
you said the word growth, and they seem to be growing
yes. And
at a better speed than our regular children.
And I think that's another important piece that we have to, Kathy and I will be pulling together to look at what that growth area looks like, where they began and then where they ended up, how much growth. Because the state is now beginning to realize that is important. To always expect that gap to shrink is a little bit unrealistic unless we're looking at maybe generation. But I think we really have to look at the growth that the children are making.
Mr. Mudge, do you have a question?
Well, I was just, thank you. I got 3 questions. I was just remarking on your comment there, the state, thinking that this is going to change, but, no. But see, it goes to the heart of some of the questions I was going to ask, because let me first go to, do you have the data on the relationship between the poverty levels of these children, okay, and the kids with the IEPs?
How many are represented?
Yeah, how many? I'd like to look at that sometime. But and another question I would then follow up with is to answer, I think, Mrs. Benson's question to some degree, is our town has been kind of fragmented by the town council's action to dense pack all the lower housing up in the north end. So that's why you got more of an issue there. So there's not much you can do about that because that's the way it is. But nonetheless, the thing that really bothers me, and I don't understand this, and I think you alluded to it, was, what are the expectations of each of these students? I mean, God forbid you have a student has 160 IQ and one has a 60 IQ or something. And how, and they must range all over these people with the IEPs. And it seems to me that there's got to be some measurement on what the expectation is to get from point A to point B. Like John Kennedy said, it's not the distance it's not how far you've got in life, it's the distance you've traveled. And, you know, you can't necessarily take a children with a child with less capability, no matter how much money you spend. And like you just said, expect them to achieve at a level with the children sitting next to them that has a much more, we'll say, higher intellectual capability. And that to me is how you have to focus your resources as well, I think, along those lines. Otherwise, I think it wouldn't be a wise expenditure of your dollars to, you know, to try to get something that maybe you really can't achieve. I don't know how you do that, by the way. But
I thought you had an answer for me. I was waiting.
no, well, no. I'll let me just one more comment. I asked the Commissioner of Education one time specifically about, you know, the average student, okay, that takes the test in the state, and it said, what's the IQ of that student? 60 or 160? She said it didn't matter. They could all pass. I was kind of flabbergasted. But that's not the truth, as far as I'm concerned.
You raised some interesting points. I don't have answers for your points, but you do raise some interesting theoretical points and philosophical points as well.
Yeah, it's just not really enough good questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Pizzullo. Thank you, Ms. Perry, for this. Oh, I'm sorry. Linda Avanzato, Mrs. Avanzato. And Julia. I'm sorry. You're not off the hook yet. So, Julia Held, and then Mrs. Avanzato.
No, I don't have any questions either. I just want to thank you because this is a different kind of presentation than some that we've had previously, and it's nice to see different information. I've never seen a breakdown of this. It's very interesting, I think, by school.
You did
like
an
that.
excellent
Thank
job.
you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Dr. Ajay, moving into Superintendent's report.
Sure. I want to talk a little bit about it. Very pleased with the science test scores that came out this past week, the NECAP science test scores. This is the test that took place in May. I'm going to ask Dr. Humbird to talk a little bit about how we did.
And Dr. Ajay provided a nice summary already to members of the committee and to our community, so I'm just going to highlight some of those great achievements that we were able to realize this time around. And so 6 out of 8 of our schools increased in their proficiency on the NECAP testing for science. So this was the test that was taken in the spring of last year, and we just got the results. As you know, not to be confused with the NECAP test that we are about to start. Our October testing is in reading, math, and writing. These were the scores from last spring. And so North Kingstown School Department proudly is one of 10 districts that made significant progress in one or more grade levels from 2011 to 2012, so from last year to this year, but also over a 4-year trend from 2008 to 2012. So it's quite a distinction for us. We're happy with that. And along those same lines, the high school showed a little bit of spike, 11% from last year's scores. So they were one of 9 high schools to be commended by the commissioner. And also, Wickford Middle School showed a double spike with 18% increase in proficiency, and was one of 5 middle schools to be commended. So with North Kingstown High School and Wickford Middle School, we were among 13 schools in Rhode Island to achieve significant progress from last year's scores and from that 4-year trend. We also had a couple of schools, elementary schools, that showed increase in proficiency. Gwinnessett went up almost 17% in there. That's exciting, especially after the presentation we just heard. And Fishing Cove improved by about 7.5% in their proficiency. So we're really pleased with the results and hope that the trends continue, so to speak.
Thank you.
I also want to comment briefly on the progress that we're making on both the Davisville Middle School and Gwinnessett Elementary roofs. And I'm going to ask Mrs. King to talk a little bit about that.
The Davisville Middle School work is wrapping up. They are just completing some of the fascia work and some of the other small things, the mechanicals and whatnot. So they should be wrapping that up, and they should be out of there in the next week, if not sooner than that. There's a meeting tomorrow morning, another construction meeting, and we'll get a final update on when they'll be finished there. The Gwinnessett roof, I believe we reported out at the last meeting that the drain over the library that had been an issue had been fixed and that it was not an issue in the last rainstorm. I met with the manufacturer of that roof last week. Based on an independent analysis that Dr. Auger and I had conducted several weeks ago, the manufacturer had agreed that there were some issues with the walk pads on that roof and how the new walk pads were installed, and they agreed to have those fixed. They would not cost the school department any money to have them fixed and properly installed, so there would be no issues. And that was based on a thorough inspection that we did in August. And also the HVAC unit that has been an issue is going to be removed and covered over for replacement planned in the spring with our bond money, and that should be happening in the next week or two.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, that's it for Superintendent's report. That brings us to routine items. Lorraine, I don't believe, are we?
Executive sessions after the meeting, so we'll do those later.
Okay, thank you. All right, that brings us to the consent part of the agenda. Is there anything to be exempted? Mr. Busgarden?
I have 4 things, but all of them are just brief comments, so it won't take very long. In fact, all of these I've discussed with various people beforehand. D1A.
D.
1A.
I don't see an A.
D. 1A.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. What I'm looking at doesn't have the A. Okay?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. F4, 5, and 16.
All right, Mr. Mudge, I saw your hand up.
Yes, item 17.
Is that F17?
Is termination a supervisor?
Okay.
I had the same.
And also the financial, on the monthly updates,
If D1 is exempted, then all of D, because we voted on those all at one time.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
D1A.
All right, seeing Mrs. Benson, sorry.
17, just didn't want to be redundant.
Got it. All right.
Make a motion to approve the remainder of the consent item.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the remainder of the consent items in a second. Lorraine, could you take a roll call vote, please?
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
Melvoy Benson.
Yes, with those that's not
The remainder.
including those
You're
exempted.
approving the remainder.
Don Busgarden.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't at some of the meetings that are in here.
Okay, Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welch.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1. I'm sorry, 6 with 1 abstention.
All right, Mr. Busgarden, you exempted D1.
Yes. The A portion, and Doctor, we spoke about this, and so is Ms. King, we spoke about it as well. There was a, in the budget report for athletics, there are a few line items that jumped out at me, and that was paint. Paint athletics for the high school, $4,600. Paint for the middle schools were not as much, but equally, that jumped out at me. And I think ballpark, I didn't add it up. I didn't have a chance to go through and add up, but somewhere in the vicinity of $9,000 or $10,000 worth of paint. And I was told that it was for lining the fields, and it's the aerosol cans that go in the walk behind that you push and squeeze a button and mark the field. I'm sure there's more efficient ways of putting paint on the field. And in fact, I will send forward some links to Ms. King on some equipment that, for the price of the high school paint, we could have a piece of equipment that does it airlessly, which we wouldn't be putting any fluorocarbons into the atmosphere with the aerosol cans, and we may be able to buy the paint a little more efficiently in 5-gallon cans as opposed into aerosol cans.
Good suggestion.
All right. Mr. Mudd, you also exempted D1.
Yes, on page 72, the monthly summary. We report to the August report. I guess it goes to the General's office. I note in there that we have adopted budget of revenues of $57,243,000. Okay, we have adopted budget expenditures $57,813,000. I think I don't understand why that is.
That was because we were waiting for the state money that we ended up finding out that we were going to get at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So that's your difference between the two. So if you see the revised budget, you see the revised budget is 57.8, and the revised budget expenditures is 57.8.
Yeah, but the adopted budget wasn't 57,813. And what adopted budget is that? Was that the school committee's adopted budget, or was that the first adopted budget by the for expenditures by the council?
I'm sorry, I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I guess with respect to the sheet, I'm concerned even with the revenues as well as the expenditures. Are we showing in here the school committee's submittal to the town, or are we showing the town council's appropriated budget? And that would be told whether it's revenues or expenditures. Now, the reason I say that is the revised budget certainly could be what occurred when we changed from the original appropriation by the town and added the additional funding from the state, which brought us up to 57,813. But certainly that wasn't our original adopted budget. So we need some clarity on that.
Mrs. King, isn't there a difference between what we adopt as a budget and then what the town council ultimately gives us because of the school aid? I'm just thinking the budget that we adopted in February was quite different from what the town councils then gave us.
Well, it is, and if you see, you look at adopted budget, the general aid, which is the state aid, is 10,188. The revised budget is the 10,758, which reflects when we get our solid answer from the state on what our state funding would be. Sure. That's the difference between the two.
Yeah, I understand that, but look at your expenditures.
Yeah, but if you look at your expenditures down at the bottom as well, on the revised budget, Mr. Mudge, you see revised budget revenues are 57.8 and revised budget expenditures are 57.8.
Yeah,
so when the budget was adopted, we knew that we were pending those amounts of money.
That's the issue. It's not what we thought. It's what was adopted that should be reflected in here is what I'm saying. It's not what you thought.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
The budget that we adopted at the end of June was settled up with what we have as the expenditures. It's not as if the two were any different, what we adopted at the end of June.
Let me go over it again. We have a town council, a school committee adopted budget that we sent forward to the town council. Then the town council adopted a budget, okay, for us originally. That adopted budget by the council in its first allocation to us for expenditures was $57,243,000, and that's what should be reflected in the expenditure column. Not what we thought we were going to expend. It was what was fiscally adopted and legally adopted should be shown in the initial, as the initial adopted budget. And there were two adopted budgets. There was one
No, there
on
was a
May
proposed
22nd.
budget. Yes, and that was a proposed budget.
No.
That was not an adopted.
The town council's budget was not a proposed budget. It was an adopted budget of $57,243,000 in May. Not until June, okay, was that changed.
Mr. Cerisi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just suggest for the purposes of moving along with the rest of the agenda, perhaps Mrs. King could provide an overview to Mr. Mudge in an email or at our next meeting on the issue that he's raised. And at this time, I would motion to approve D1.
Second.
Excuse me, I still have some more items here on D1.
You may ask, I'm going to go to a time limit here, Mr. Mudge, and so I'll give you 3 minutes to wrap up your other questions.
On page 74.
What's it titled, Bill?
I don't know, John, it's just page 74 here, it's under D1. Okay, sorry.
If you could just tell us which of the budgets it is, that would help us being able to find it, or the reports it is, that's
yeah,
all.
just name
So
the
if it is the annual report, then that will allow Mr.
You have two numbers there, E.1.A, or page 74. That's what I have in the hard copy.
Yes.
What is your question, Mr. Mudge?
The science kit. Oh. Okay.
Science kids.
Now, what this says in here is that we have an encumbering order of, for 212 and 213, the science kits, for $31,000.
Mr. Mudge, that's not under D1. The science kits were under...
D1. E like Edward 1.
D, not D like Bobby. D, he's saying.
Oh, that has already been approved.
Beg your pardon, I thought that was falling under that, so I guess
Oh.
I can't talk about that. Okay.
All right, so we have...
Final one is the enrollment report.
That's not on the D.
That's not under D1 either, Mr. Mudge. That's at the end of the agenda. All right. Lorraine, could we have a roll call vote for approval of D1?
Melvoin Benson.
Yeah.
Approval of the financial reports.
Don't include all
No.
the kids that are going to tech school.
John Biscardin.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
D one, no.
Approval of financial reports.
Approval of financial reports.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welsh.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-1. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the next exempted item by Mr. Biscardin, F4.
Yeah, this is for the approval of intramural directors and coaches. Are these sports are currently being played, correct? Fall tennis, touch football, basketball, kickball. I thought we were going to have these all approved in mass before.
I wrote to you about that. It is my intention to do that. Number 4? Okay. I'm not as certain about the, after-school programs because they don't necessarily start the first week of school.
Okay.
They start a few weeks in. There are some coaches. As you remember, we did a lot of the coaches in June.
Right.
But, there has been a shift in our, the directors for our athletics, so.
Okay.
I'm working with them. We have some ideas about, opening up jobs for coaches immediately after a season ends instead of waiting, until a few weeks before the new season begins. We're going to try some things. I'm not sure that I can always avoid every situation, but that's what I'm aiming for.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your email, so I apologize.
To get to get all of these, fulfilled. I'm not absolutely certain that all of the fall intramurals are not done before these programs begin. But I know there are a few sports teams that's not the case. And I apologize for that.
Well, I think this is, though, just intramural. So,
Yeah,
so
that particular item, yeah.
Right. E4 is intramural stuff. It is not a sports team. So
Right,
a
it's
lot
the-
of times they're a little bit different.
Okay, that's why I was, I was looking for thank you, you clarified that.
All right. Do we have a motion for E4?
So moved. Second.
I'm sorry, F4. I should clarify. F4.
Second.
Seeing no other questions, Lorraine, could we have a roll call vote for F4?
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
F4, intramurals.
Intramural coaches.
I had a question there.
We're
F-
now on to the vote, Mr. Mudge.
Well, we're working with different agendas here and documents, and it's difficult. So you're doing...
Mr. Mudge, I'm on to the vote. I need a
F4.
yes or a no.
F4.
Would you repeat, Ms. Page? I didn't hear you.
I said we're at the voting part. We're taking a roll call vote. This is for F4. I need a yes or a no to approve F4.
Okay.
Mr. Mudge.
Yes.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welch.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Melvoin Benson.
Yes.
John Biscardi.
One quick point, I just noticed it was actually pointed out
I
to me.
will say, Mr. Busgard, I am looking for a yes or no. It is the voting section.
I approve it, but why is bocce ball Irish? I thought bocce ball was Italian.
That's a good
I'm Italian, I always played bocce ball. I didn't know Irish people played bocce ball.
Is that Irish bocce are you
It's a
I'll launch a complete investigation on that right away, Mr. Garden.
Point of order.
I didn't catch that myself.
Point of order.
What is your point of order, Mrs. Benson?
My point of order is we don't sit here and laugh about the different ethnic organizations.
I was telling a joke.
No, it's just a joke. I think Mrs. Benson, sometimes we need to be a little lighthearted on some things. So I don't think that Mr.
We're not
Busgard said
lighthearted
that.
about anything here.
Mr. Busgard, did you give?
I voted yes, and I'm sorry I brought it up.
I'm Irish, and I didn't think Did the vote pass, Mrs. Burton? Thank you. Mr. Busgarden, you exempted
African and I
F5.
crack.
Mr. Busgarden, you exempted F5.
F5, yeah, and again,
He's the biggest
Dr. Humbert
I ever seen.
and I spoke about this. I just wanted to make sure it was clarified for everybody that the math intervention specialist, that is a,
Very important position.
and the math and physics, the 1.0 full-time math and physics, these are, none of these are all new hires? They're not backfilling anybody, is that correct?
The position for the math intervention was a replacement. We had another teacher in that position, and she moved to a district-level position for an ISP, which is part of our evaluation system. That position of that teacher is grant-funded, and this position for the math interventionist is also grant-funded under early intervening services.
And B, the 6.6 FTE math and 0.4 FTE physics?
Those are backfilled positions.
Okay. Both of them are?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just asking.
There's nothing that's new to the district here.
All right. And none of these are taking the place of the ADs?
Yes, that's correct.
I don't know that for certain. The 0.6 math, it all kind of comes out in the wash.
Okay.
We needed 0.6 FTE filled. The AD had a full schedule of math, but there's other movement in the math department too. So, is that person in the mix? I guess so.
Mr. Mudge.
Yes, I'd like to follow up on Mr. Stratton's comment. What I look at that as is, in fact, that 0.6 is filling at least the 0.4 portion of what the new AD's position was in mathematics. There's nothing about the people in these positions either, which tells me that, in fact, we didn't save a penny, okay, by hiring part-time AD, because what this says is that we had to hire at least like 0.4 to make up the difference for the classes that the AD is no longer going to carry as a workload.
Well, I would disagree with that point, Mr. Mudge, because but it's not the point that you just made about, I never claimed that the reduction would be in a reduction of math classes. The point is that we have a part-time AD doing the work that a full-time salary used to do. The savings is purely from the athletic director position, not because of a reduction in math. At the high school level, as you recall, this past season, we reduced, I believe, over 2.0 FTEs in various subjects, and I believe part of that included at least one math class. So there has been a reduction in classes at the high school, and the money that goes along with it, and there has been a reduction in the amount of money that we pay for our athletic directorship.
That's see, I disagree with that concept, John, and I agree with you because that math teacher going back and taught, okay, he could have taught 4/10 of this class if we had hired a part-time athletic director. That 4/10, by the way, of the salary, now that the AD is no longer performing, is taken up by this individual. And what that means, that 4/10 means roughly $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year. So when you add the athletic director's salary and you add all the other AD salary, we didn't save anything by going to a part-time athletic director.
No, that's not true.
I don't.
This is true.
Mr. Cerisi.
Thank you, Madam
Numbers
Chair.
are there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's surely Mr. Mudge's interpretation. We had a full-time athletic director that we reduced to a part-time athletic director, and the previous athletic director was never teaching a math class, so we didn't backfill.
You don't
math
understand
class.
what I'm
So
saying.
I'd make a motion at this time
Okay.
to approve F5.
Second. No.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor and a second to approve F5. Lorraine, could we have a roll call vote?
William Mudge to approve F5.
Are these,
Yeah. At this point, Mr. Mudge, I'm looking for a yes or no on the vote.
well, I'm going to say no, because
Thank
here
you.
again, you said A is effective the
Kimberly
27th of August.
Yes.
And now this is a
Richard
month
Welsh.
later. Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Mel Boyd Benson.
No.
John Biscarden.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-2.
Thank you. That brings us to F16. Mr. Biscarden.
And this goes, Doctor, this is the fall coaches that were not the extracurricular coaches. Mm-hmm. This falls under the category that this go round, we're going to talk to them after the season.
Yes.
So we can get this done.
Yes.
And if I remember, Dr. Auger, some of these people have been on our schedule before to approve them for their position. Is it merely that this time we're approving for the amount? Because I know we had a discussion before on Mr. Gil Martin
That's
and
what
the football coach, and I remember seeing Mr. Froberg and Mr. Fanning, too.
That's why I thought this looked familiar, but
Yeah. This may be a more complete list. I don't know that. I'd have to check that out. I will check that out and answer that for you at our next meeting.
Mr.
I
Cerisi.
don't save the old ones to go back and compare.
Yeah,
This
right.
one-
I agree. You know,
this
if
will
they're
just-
already approved, they're approved.
Yeah.
Mr. Cerisi.
I'll motion to approve F16 at this time.
Excuse me, I have a comment, please.
And now there's a discussion on the motion. Mr. Mudge.
Yeah, on the volunteer assistant coaches, I see there's not a salary there. Okay?
Yes, I believe they're volunteer.
Yeah, are they a volunteer, or are they being paid by one of our Booster Club activities with funds from one of the people that support the athletic program?
I don't understand, I don't know why that's relevant. It's not, if money doesn't come out of our budget, why do we care?
Well, we can't because we have a responsibility, okay? It's a Form 990, okay, that's applicable, that must be filed, okay? And it's all relative to the funding of our educational activities. And
I
are they
think right now
certified?
we have the information we have is no.
We asked for that.
Okay, so they aren't getting any extra funding from anybody else.
As of right now,
Thank you.
as of today, September 25th, that answer is no. I'm not going to say that that's not going to change. Yes, Mrs. Avanzato.
That
And then
will
Mrs.
it will come before the committee if it changes, correct? Because we already went over this a couple times.
Yeah,
We asked for it
yes.
to come. Okay, very good, thank you.
I'd
Mr.
like
Welch.
clarification of that
I
comment.
just have a quick question. So if they're volunteers and they're doing schoolwork, how are they covered under workman's comp? I don't need the answer tonight.
They're covered under our volunteer policy. As long as they're volunteering directly for the school department, they are covered under our insurance.
Okay.
If they're volunteering for a PTO or links, those individual organizations have to have their own coverage.
As long as they're covered. Great, thank you.
That's why we have to approve them as volunteers, so they are under our insurance policy.
But if
Mr.
they
Mudge.
receive funding from another activity, that no longer makes them a volunteer.
Well,
So I'd like to get the answer to that. Thank you.
Mrs. Benson.
I think we've been over this once before between volunteer and those people, and I still have the same question. In case a volunteer is working with a student on our school property, and this is a recognized sport within our school department, and something happens, you know, a child fall or get hurt or something that's very serious, who is responsible if those parents happen to choose to sue for compensation or for medical treatment or anything?
I believe that Mrs. King just answered that they fall under
Mrs.
the
King,
trust.
would you speak louder and give me the answer? Because that's a very much concern, and
Are you interested in the child's coverage or the volunteer's coverage, Mrs. Benson?
the whole school coverage, because I think, I'm not sure, but there seemed to be an item, I'm sure about this, there was an item that related to this same thing in the last issue of the trust, and I said, that's something we need to come up on, because nobody can take our responsibility. Your child get hurt, Mr. Cerise, and Mr. Welch is volunteered. We are still responsible, and that's what I want to get an answer for.
I agree, and the volunteer themselves also are covered as long as they're volunteering directly for the school department. The difference is if they're volunteering for another organization that's a separate entity.
Okay.
And the students have the option of having their student accident insurance, but other than that, they're still covered under us if there's some sort of negligence, and that would go through the trust.
Okay. And the point I'm trying to make is,
Point of order.
what is
Yes,
your point?
Mr.
My
Cerise,
point
what's
of
your point of
order
order?
is, I
Madam
want
Chair.
to complete.
Madam Chair, this discussion is way off,
Information.
way off topic from the motion that's on the table. We're simply approving a list of fall coaches, and that's the motion on the table. I'd ask that we get back to the discussion or call the question, please.
Are you making a
Madam
motion to
Chair,
call the
I
question?
was asking for a point of
All right, so we have
information.
a motion to call the question. Lorraine, could we
I think
take
there's
a
a
roll call
point of
vote
information down
for
here.
calling the questions?
Madam Chair? There's a
We're having
point
a
of
roll call
information
vote
by
for,
Mrs.
we're having a roll call vote for calling the question.
We
Kimberly
don't
Page.
follow Robert's Rules
Yes.
of Order?
No, they
Richard
don't
Welch.
follow their
Yes.
rules of order.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
Melvoin Benson.
No.
John Biscardin.
yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes?
William Mudge.
Abstain.
Okay, and
Would you
this
let
is
the
on-
record show
Yes, okay.
that we did not, okay, Mrs. Benson's point of
So-
information was not acknowledged, please.
We are now then going on to the vote
For
to
F-16.
approve F-16.
Richard Welsh.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Delboy Benson. To approve F-16.
All coaches.
Yes.
John Biscarden.
And by the way,
Yes or no vote, please.
Larry Cirisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
Yes.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, that brings us to F-17. And I know that Mr. Mudge and Mrs. Benson had asked for this to be exempted from the agenda. I will say that I have talked to the employee before this meeting, and this will be on an executive session agenda in the future. So it is my understanding that we are not to be talking about this in open session.
Well,
I told the employee it would be on an October agenda.
well, that's okay, but I have a comment. My first comment is going to be, I move that this be deleted and no action be taken at this time.
Are you making a motion, Mr. Mudge?
Yes, regarding the termination of this individual. Principally, because, I think that the mere fact is troubling to me that we would have the termination of an individual on the consent agenda whose agenda is for routine items, and that we would try to place this in here or sneak it in, okay, as far as I'm concerned, without proper discussion and with no information on this whatsoever from anyone in terms of the pros, the cons, the ups, the downs, or whatever. And I would advise the administration, I would strongly advise the administration to have their comments regarding termination of this or any other person clearly documented in writing, when we meet to discuss this issue. Thank you. Second motion.
Is that a motion, Mr. Mudge?
A motion was to terminate or cancel this, suspend it until it's discussed at an executive committee meeting.
I second Mr. Mudge's motion.
Mr. Cerisi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you recommended, I'm not going to engage in this discussion now. I'm going to reserve my questions and comments for our executive session that the employee requested. But at the same time, I'm not going to let the continued misinformation be presented to the community that Mr. Mudge just seems to want to continue this for some reason. If you read your package, there is a letter in your package from the superintendent clearly outlining his purpose for this recommendation. So you're asking for information from the superintendent, and it's in your package. If you read your package, it's there.
Take my package. It wasn't in here. Would you like to look at it?
Mr. Cerisi has the floor.
Sorry if that information...
Would you like to look at my packet?
Mr. Mudge.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Cerisi has the floor.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
I
Madam
got
Chair.
it.
So that's,
You show it to us.
thank you, Madam Chair. I'm
not-
going,
John, I don't care about that. I
Okay.
care about what you said to me.
thank you, Madam Chair.
You don't care about
Should be in there,
information,
Mr.
then?
Mudge.
Okay?
Mr. Cerisi, were you finished?
I'm finished at this time. Again, I just don't want to, if you disagree, that's fine, you're entitled to disagree. I just don't want the misinformation to continually be running down the superintendent and school department employees by providing misinformation to the public. If you disagree with the action or you disagree with the information, that's perfectly fine. You're well within your rights to do that. But please, stop providing misinformation to the
I'm
public,
providing
because it just
information.
continues...
What I got, Mr.
just
Cerisi, you don't see
continues-
what I have here.
Mr. Mudge.
It just,
Mr. Cerisi
it
has the
just
floor.
continues to
Why
stroke,
would you
it
allow this
just
to be put on
continues
the
to stroke
consent
the
agenda?
flames.
Okay?
It's on the consent agenda, just like every other personnel
We
item is
never
on the
talked
consent
about it, and
agenda.
we want to fire somebody. That's
Mr.
really
Mudge.
taking care of our people in our community that work for us.
Mr. Mudge.
We have
Order,
no,
Mr. Mudge, point of
no,
order. Madam Chair, please, shouting out should not be allowed at the meeting. Please admonish the
Yes,
members not
I'm going to ask that we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. Mr. Mudge, if we truly followed every Robert's Rules of Order, we could take a vote and have you removed. So, you're right. So, Mrs. Avanzado.
Just a quick comment. I had concerns and questions over this item, and the superintendent had, as he always does, extended an invitation to school committee members to discuss the items with him and provide additional information. I did go in and make an appointment with the superintendent to discuss the matter. I'm glad that we're going to be having a future executive session because that's one of the things that I asked about. So I just wanted to talk about the opportunity that we all had to do that.
No, that's
All right, Lorraine, we
inappropriate.
have a motion on the table and a second. Could you take a roll call vote, please?
Madam Chair,
Yes, I have a motion on the floor in a second. Did you want to say anything more about the motion?
yes, I do. I want to clarify something. I didn't receive my packet until Saturday afternoon at 4:30. I saw the letter, Mr. Cerisi, that the superintendent had in there, and there was no other backup information. So let's make that clear, that everybody is not going around spreading things. I read the superintendent's letter, hope you read it,
Mr. Busgarden.
and I didn't see anything when it comes to the corrective actions that they had given her, and I read it clearly.
Mr. Busgarden.
So let's be fair.
I have also, when this subject was brought to our attention, I had some serious concerns about moving forward in this fashion. However, throughout the week, speaking with Dr. Auger and with Ms. King, many of my concerns were put to rest. This letter is completely descriptive of what I was told before the letter was even put out to everybody.
What?
What?
I said, what word didn't you understand? You know, we sit up here, we try to conduct business, and you're saying that you don't get your packet until Saturday. Well, excuse me, whose problem is that? You don't say you don't have the letter. Whose problem is that?
You just said that you talked to Dr.
This is buffoonery is what this
You
is.
said you talked to Dr. Auger before?
I'm going to ask
all
for
week
a
we've been
recess
talking
if
about
we
this.
need a recess before
Who's
we
been
take
talking
a
about
vote.
it all week?
One-on-one we have,
Okay.
on the phone, in person.
Recess in a second. We're taking a recess, folks. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. session from our recess. Ms. Berglund, if you could read back the motion and then take the roll call vote.
This is Mr. Mudge's motion that this be suspended and no action taken at this time in terms of this individual. Richard Welsh.
No.
Linda Avanzado. No. Melvoyd Benson.
Yes,
John
if I
Biscard.
understood her
No.
reading the motion. Did you read
Larry
the motion?
No.
William Mudge.
Would you repeat the motion, please?
Was your motion that this item be suspended and no action taken at this time in terms of this individual?
Yes, I was doing that for Mrs. Benson said.
Kimberly Page.
No.
Motion fails, 5-2. Thank you.
Mr. Cerisi.
Madam Chair, motion to approve F-17 at this time is recommendation.
Second.
Mrs. Berglund, could you take a roll call vote?
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Melvoyd Benson.
No.
John Biscardi.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welsh.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-2.
That brings us into the unfinished business portion of our agenda. Mr. Cerisi.
Madam Chair, motion to approve A at this time?
Second.
All right, so there is a motion on the floor to approve
3A.
3A. Is there any further discussion?
3A.
Section 3, letter A. Yes, Mrs. Avanzado.
Yeah, transportation audit.
Yes.
And we're voting to approve or disapprove.
That is the motion that is on the
For
floor.
discussion.
Okay. Please don't let it hurt you to repeat something as long as you sit in the chair and the member needs information.
And I have repeated it, Mrs. Benson.
Oh,
And I have
okay.
now called on Mrs. Avanzado. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Mrs. Avanzado.
Thank you. A couple of quick things. We received an email on this item mentioning the fact that this group that we are looking to, which we already had a bidding process to make it clear to the public and anyone who's watching, that we had a bidding process regarding this a long time ago when we discussed having it about a year ago. So it did go out to bid. There was some concern related to the fact that this particular company has also done some analysis for the state. And I think there was some confusion that maybe the state would somehow be benefiting from this audit, but this is not an audit to determine who's going to be doing our busing. We've already had a review of that. We are under contract with our bus contractors. This is simply a vendor who looks at routes and for efficiency purposes. It's not a matter of the company that's doing it somehow benefiting in any way or any change made to the delivery of the busing service, at least as I understand it. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there are a couple of things that I believe this committee needs to be looking at regarding transportation that may not be under this audit, because we don't want to broaden the scope. We already discussed this. It would be too expensive. But there are some things that we didn't follow up on from previous subcommittees, Special Education Transportation Subcommittee and another Transportation Subcommittee, I think that Mrs. Benson was on, where we had a couple of things that we needed to follow up on regarding training of personnel on buses and also regarding some office efficiency issues, things like that. I would just like to get that on the agenda, and I'd like to move that forward in tandem with this audit that we're talking about doing, not as a part of, because I don't want to broaden the scope and make it too expensive for the district. I think that's something we can do in-house and review those findings and improve on them perhaps, because I think we need to do a few things there. So I'd request that that be on an agenda as well. Thank you.
I would be glad to. I did receive that email, and they are something that Mr. Horan and I are going to take a look at, and we can update the committee once we have done that.
I figured you could do that. We can all do that in-house. Thank you very much.
And we just want to clarify for our listeners that you're talking about some of the special education issues that you wanted to talk about under policies and that sort of thing. Am I correct?
Most are special education issues, yes, because that came out of a subcommittee for that purpose, but a few are having to do with office matters, things like that. Just in general, those things that we would follow up on, those two reports that were forwarded to us by a parent, make sure those recommendations of the subcommittees were implemented.
Mrs. Benson and then Mr. Mudge.
You're correct, Mrs. Avisano. I was on the Transportation Subcommittee, and we got out an in-depth report. And my question was, why do we need an audit when we didn't go through with that report? And we had representatives from special education and all segments, and volunteers who were perfectly capable and spent much time in doing the job. And I asked that question, and no one seemed to have known where that report went. And as of yet, I haven't seen the report. And if we could do that, look at that report, we could probably, since we have to save money, we could probably, and most likely could save money, because we have less students now and more buses than we had when we had less students and more buses. And all of that was in the report. And it was well representative of the community.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Mr. Mudge.
So do I get an answer to my question?
I think if you want the report, that you merely have to go and ask for a copy. We keep those reports, and we were given the reports all the
Mrs.
time.
Avisano hit on that, and she spoke about that report. And has that report ever been used? Has it been used, Mrs. Attorney?
well, I'm sorry.
No, you wasn't here, Miss King.
I don't know.
You know
what you're
nothing
talking
about this.
Benson, are you talking about a report?
From the Transportation Committee concerning the buses.
Well,
I'm
isn't
actually
that why
calling
you're
Mr.
not
Cerisi.
You're doing an audit right now,
Mr.
that's
Cerisi.
why.
Well, I think the audit should be postponed until we can go through that report.
Mr. Cerisi.
Excuse me, you had
Yes,
recognized
I
me
think
after
Mr.
Mrs. Benson?
Cerisi is going to be, yes, and I did say that you would be next, but I think Mr. Cerisi has something to Mrs. Benson's point that she's asking about.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Speak out, Mr. Cerisi. I want to hear you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That report was given to this full school committee, and we did review that report, and I'm not understanding, since Mrs. Benson was the chairperson of that subcommittee, how she doesn't have a report. But we all have received the report, and we went over the report. This was a number of years ago, and they are two totally different topics, as Mrs. Avisano outlined. This topic is to do with reviewing routes, mileage, roads, stops. It's to review things from an efficiency basis. So they're two totally separate items. But certainly, I think the report submitted from the subcommittee, we do need to look to our administration as far as where we stand on those things and address any things that may not have been addressed from a policy and from a safety perspective. And as a matter of fact, the parent that sent us the email, I believe, also attached a copy of that original report to the email just last week. So all that information has been furnished to us, and I look forward to us finally getting on with this audit and getting to the efficiency aspect of the routes, as well as Mrs. Page said, she would place this on a future agenda to address the report itself and the policy and safety recommendations that were outlined. Thank you.
Mr. Mudge, and then I can come back to you, Mrs.
In answer
Benson.
to the question, since I brought it up for Mr. Cerisi, if it's okay with you, Dr. O.J., I know they didn't get rid of all of it. I will be in your office tomorrow between 10 and 11 to recopy the report, and I will bring the 5 cents for each page, because we don't destroy. I'm sure it's there, and they charge you for copying. So if you wouldn't mind, I will be there at 10:30
Mrs. Benson, if you received the email, then you would already have that in your package of
State law
emails that are
does not
printed out.
require you to
Right,
have
but-
email.
But what I'm
and you
saying is,
mentioned that
Ms.
one more time.
Berglund prints out
Mention
all
that
your
one more
emails,
time.
and so you do not need to make a separate copy, because it was in your emails that Mrs. Berglund already printed out for you. Mr. Mudge.
It was a letter in the email, but I'm talking about the complete copy of the committee. You all seem to can't realize that the Transportation Committee had a copy. And I'm sure, and we had very capable people on it.
Mr. Mudge.
One sitting in the audience tonight.
To go back over this a few years, there's been a lot of studies going back the last, 6 or 7 years, transportation, not only on the efficiencies, but to affect the alignment of our elementary school bus schedules, which is needed.
Excuse me, Mr. Mudge. Mrs. Benson, I can't hear over your voice. Could we please allow Mr. Mudge to talk? Thank you.
Get your hearing aid. You get what you want to hear.
All right, Mrs. Benson, that's enough. Mr. Mudge.
So, we've had a lot of studies over a period of time. In fact, dating back, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we must have had 3 or 4, Kathy Brown, other people, and our former transportation director, Dewey Patel, has helped even within the last 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years. And I believe almost 2 years ago, even less than that, I asked that we consider asking Mr. Patel if he would spearhead an effort like this. And I spoke to him again today, and he said he'd be glad to. And he'd be glad to do this study, if you'd like, or he could oversee this study. But I think there is a need to have a few people involved in this, to oversee this, as we did before, which is the precedent, to review the work scope we're going to put out to make sure it's what we want, and it includes, like Mr. Cerisi said, all the safety, all the attending items, okay, with respect to the transportation of our children. Now, in addition, we ought to ensure that whatever we do, that we are in compliance with our school department policy, especially the 1 mile policy, which was an issue with the Ranger Road, as well as the 5/8 mile policy for kindergarten through grade 5 students. The reason I say that is, as we look back at the current routing schedules, we are not in compliance with that policy. And I would respectfully ask that this be modified to clearly indicate that we want the contract to address the school committee policy and the mileage in terms of complying with the school committee policy. And that's a different issue than efficiency.
Mr. Cerisi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I'm not going to let the misinformation continue to stand. Dr. Roger, the issue that was raised earlier in the year with regard to the 1 mile and the 5/8 policy in state law, it's my understanding that you reviewed that with the chief of police, and we were within compliance of both state law and our policy?
That is correct. In fact, Mr. Mudge got an email himself directly from the chief of police stating that.
That's not correct.
Thank you, Dr. Roger.
That's not correct.
All right, we have a motion on the table. Mr. Busgarden.
Not an adequate.
Mr. Busgarden has the floor.
I haven't.
I would like, no,
Mr.
I'm sorry,
Busgarden
I have the floor now.
has the floor.
I have the floor now. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the fact that Mr. Mudge wants to bring everybody and their uncle in on this transportation audit. I do believe time is of the essence, and I think that I am very comfortable with Mr. Haran being the point person, making sure we are doing everything we need to be done, and making sure that the vendor is doing everything we want them to do. If we continually expand and enlarge the group of the sphere of influence, that is directly proportionate to the amount of time it takes for something to get done. Now, I'm sure you're the person you want to have involved, Mr. Mudge, is very qualified. However, our transportation director is the one that's in charge.
All right, I believe that, I
Madam
don't
Chair.
see anybody new's hand up, and so rather than having this be a back and forth, we do have a motion on
I'd
the
like to
floor.
clarify,
and-
misstatement by Mr. Cerisi, please.
No,
Point of order,
I'm not
he
going
does it to me all the
What is
time.
your point of order?
Point of order is the fact that when we in fact are
This
not
is not a point of
following-
order.
We are not
A
following
point
our
of order
5/8 mile and 1 mile,
Is
okay,
that you are bringing up
school
something
department policy.
procedurally. This is not a procedure question. This is
Okay.
more argument.
Okay.
So, Mr. Cerisi.
It's not an argument, it's
Chair,
fact.
can we motion to call the question, please?
Second.
I have a motion to call the question in a second. Lorraine, could we take a roll call vote?
John Buscardin.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
Mel Boyd Benson.
No.
William Mudge.
No?
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welsh.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
And this is on the question
Could you read
To
back the
approve.
motion, please? And to
Read back
take
the
a roll
motion
call
so
vote.
we can hear it.
It is to approve the transportation audit. Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
No?
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welsh.
Yes.
Linda Avanzado.
Yes.
Mel Boyd Benson.
No.
John Buscardin.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-2.
It's yours.
Mm-hmm. That's mine.
All right, that brings us to item B under unfinished business
Mm-hmm.
For our goals. Mr. Cerisi.
Madam Chair, I'd offer a motion to approve this item at this time, but I do want to say or request that we actually put this back on the agenda for review after the new school committee is seated in December, because I do think it's important to have input and comments from the new committee members and make sure that the full new committee is all are on board with the school committee goals that as outlined here. So I'll make a motion to approve it at this time now, but again, I request that we put this on the agenda for review in December.
Second.
All right, so the motion is second. I do think that that was our intent when we met back in August, was that we would review these when we had the new school committee on board. Mr. Mudge.
Yes, I'd like to comment on both the school committee goals and the principal's goals. I think there's a great absence in the fact that the goals are not related to any quantifiable, identifiable events that you could, in fact, determine whether you achieve the goal or not. Say, improve school committee dynamics through professional development and so forth. Well, what's the earmark, what's the benchmark to show that we have actually achieved these goals? And I think the goals are inadequate without the benchmark for what we consider an achievement or not an achievement. So we need to go back and revise these goals, okay, in light of putting down what we feel is a satisfactory or successful achievement of the goals, which in some cases is very difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Mudge. It would have been helpful if you had come to the meeting in August to help with that. Mrs. Avanzado.
Perhaps we had
I would just say that if we were to go back and redo every single item that there's a concern or question about with Mr. Mudge, we would be I don't know how we'd ever get through anything. I honestly don't. I appreciate the fact that we wouldn't be able to have a benchmark regarding improving school committee dynamics. I think everyone agrees that's a good goal for the school committee to have. I don't know how we would tell, but I still think we need to have it as a goal.
Just to be clear, my motion was to approve all of B, 1 and 2.
I think I did mention it the last time we had the goals and objectives of the superintendent last year.
Mr. Welch.
Yeah,
Mr. Welch, and then
I just wanted to make a comment about on the school committee goals, item number 1. Under Title 16, school committees are charged with certain responsibilities. Identify the educational needs of the community, develop educational policies that meet the needs of the community, evaluate the performance of the school system itself. I don't think we do this, so if we are doing it, I think that the school committee ought to see this, but if not, my suggestion is that we contact the graduates maybe over the last 4 or 5 years and do it on an annual basis for them to let us know, the school committee know, how well prepared they were in our high school. It's just another evaluation tool. It's different from all the tests that they take, especially when our youngsters go to college and they compete with students from other states and whatnot. If we're not doing something like that, I think we should, and I think it ought to come to the school committee so the school committee can look at it and say, it appears, along with other things, that there are some areas where we might be able to improve.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Mr. Cerisi, and then Mrs. Benson, and then Mr. Busgarden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I hate to continue down this path, but I'm not going to sit here and let the misinformation continue to be spoon-fed to the public. I'm going to keep rebutting these items because there seems to be a public relations issue and a misinformation issue. So I think we need, as a committee, that needs to be a goal that we address. We had meetings where we outlined some goals and objectives for the superintendent.
Yes.
Which Mr. Mudge did not attend and give his input to those goals and objectives that we set for the superintendent. We also recently did our annual evaluation of the superintendent and had a discussion on that evaluation process and as well as the evaluation results. Not only did Mr. Mudge not attend, he didn't even do an evaluation of the superintendent when he had the opportunity to do a written formal evaluation. So I hate to continue down this path, but I am not going to sit here and allow this to continue. Again, thank you.
Mrs. Benson, and then Mr. Busgarden.
I just wanted to make the statement that I agree with you, Mr. Welch, that we should contact some of the students who were left and how well prepared they are. I'm sure all of us have kept up with the conference that was being held this week at the UN, and thank you, Dr. O.J., for that piece of information about the budget within the packet, that news release. And one of the things and the main topics, and you're right, Mr. Welch, everybody's not wrong every time. You were right. One of the things that they were talking about, and it was a great discussion, was educating the kids for global use, not just for North Kingstown, Quonset, and Davisville. Global use. So you were right, Mr. Welch. Maybe that's something we should go into. And I have said many a times, sometimes you have to go backwards before you go forward. And it's very disturbing to us to have to look at some of these things that have passed. It's not so bad to know what happened in the past. It can prepare us for the future.
Thank you. Mr. Busgarden, and then Mrs. Avanzato, and Mr. Mudge.
Criticized by you people that don't even
All right,
read.
Mrs. Benson.
Did you read the article this week in the Times?
It is now Mr. Busgarden who has the floor.
Well, don't criticize me.
I don't believe anybody was. Thank you, Ms. Page. Well, goal setting is very important because if you don't set goals, you don't get anywhere. You don't realize how, if you're making an accomplishment, if you're making strides towards the end result, or if you're just treading water. I've been involved in goal setting personally, professionally, on both sides, giving and receiving. It's very difficult to set goals for a group because goals have to be measurable. They have to be, there's an acronym, I think it's SMART, I don't know what it all stands for. The only one that sticks in mind is measurable. A goal is not a goal unless you can measure it. And for a group to have a goal, it's very difficult to put measurables on it, especially elected officials when we don't have, we are one of, each of us are one of 7 with equal, there's nobody, there's not a manager. There's no way they can enforce the goals to make sure everybody is keeping up their end of the deal. However, with the superintendent, it's a little bit easier because he's one person and we can do measurables. The goals that were set for him are, I think, first, they're much better, I believe, than the previous year's goals. They're more pointed and they're more direct. And this was just a miscommunication, a misunderstanding totally on my part. When we were going through this process, I asked certain things to be, I assumed certain things were going to be put in here, and my assumption was incorrect. So I will vote to approve these. However, Doctor, I would like to sit with you and talk to you about specifically 2 and 3. We talked about 1 and how your goal is going to mirror the new business manager's goals. But, for example, 2 and 3, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what is going to be considered measurable in the meetings aspect of these goals, as well as how we're going to measure these second annual report, other than it just going out, and 2, the measuring by if the building is viable by the occupants of the school. I mean, it's occupied now, so does that mean that goal is already being met? Are we looking at increasing occupancy by 5%, or what your plans are for that? And I would just like to, like I said, I'm all for approving the goals as they are, but I would just like to, go over and get a point.
Do you want to discuss this now, or?
Oh, it's up to you. I mean, if you're comfortable.
I mean, very briefly, I would just say, with the second item, I don't, with the green school issue going away, I feel it is important to have a comprehensive plan for the use of Davisville Elementary, and so I'm exploring some options right now. I plan on having this as an agenda item in the next few weeks, as a matter of fact, and talk about some ideas that I have. And so I guess my point would be, if a comprehensive plan does become approved and gets realized, then I've accomplished the goal. I don't believe that the small amount of office use that we use for that building right now is really any kind of a comprehensive plan. It's available space that we use it. That's about it right now. Mm-hmm. So something needs to happen for the long term, and that's what I'm looking to do. The annual report is something that I'm looking at. I got a lot of positive feedback for the report that went out last year. And I did get some ideas back from the public and from school committee members about how to make that a better item. I think it's an important item, particularly to be published after we get our test scores and before our next budget cycle gets into full gear in the spring. So so people can see just what we're accomplishing here, what is the data that has come in over the past year, the good and the bad. And so people kind of understand what kind of a product that they're getting before they go into budget season. I think that's an important picture for people to have, for the good and the bad. So I plan on having that report out and having a product that people feel is valuable to them is what I would see as the way to measure the goal, that it's out there.
Mrs. Avanzato.
I appreciate John's comments and insights regarding managing, his previous experience managing, and regarding specificity of goals. I think we've improved them and made them a little bit more specific. I understand maybe there's a bit of a gap still. Maybe we could talk about that further. But I would also like to comment on Mr. Welch and Mrs. Benson's discussion, and I know it's not on topic, but again, I'm going to just use this opportunity to say maybe on a future agenda where we don't have a ton of things on the agenda, I would like to discuss our guidance department in general and do a little bit of brainstorming and work with that issue. I've had a lot of parents bring it up to me. I like the idea of going back to students. I think that would be very important, especially having had a child just go through it and getting a lot of feedback from him. I think we should go to the kids and after they're out a couple of years or even a year and gather information and stay competitive, because it's amazing how competitive it is when you're trying to get into colleges and different guidance departments. You can get a leg up if you know your students and how they were helped or what held them back in the process. So I would suggest that would be on a future agenda, even though I don't see it as a school committee goal particularly, but I think it's something we need to talk about.
All right, so everyone has had a chance to talk. I do see your hand, Mrs. Benson.
I think
and
you left me out down here.
I think you were the first person who got to talk.
I was after Mrs. Amatano.
All right, Mr. Mudge, what did you want to say?
Well, first of all, I would like to comment, I'm going to go backwards here on Dr. O'Shea's use of Davisville Elementary School. The small use that we have for office space is really not adequate to, as I interpret it, to justify the continuance of our presence there. In terms of a measurable goal, for example, on something like this, I'm not sure that the school committee agreed that we wanted Dr. O'Shea to develop a plan for Davisville Elementary School, but I would think that if they did, what we would say a measurable goal would be to say that we could make a profit on the school. Or
that's why
we want
there's
to
a
make
motion on the floor.
a $200,000 profit, something like that, towards the goal. Okay? So that's just one comment there. Now, with respect to what Mr. Cerisi said, I think you'll find, Madam Chair, that I did send you a list of goals for Dr. O'Shea and the school committee by email some time ago, and especially with respect to school committee goals, I can specifically say that I said our goals should be based on Rhode Island General Law 16.2 with state school committee goals. And of course, they were summarily rejected, so why would I bother participating in anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mudge. You sent me goals a year ago. These are the goals for this year. So we have a motion on the floor. Lorraine, could we take a roll call vote?
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welch.
Yes.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
Melvoyd Benson.
Yes, we don't have Mr. Way anyway.
Don Biscardi.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
No, they're inadequate.
Motion passes 6-1. Thank you.
All right, we are nearing the 9:30 mark, and we do have an executive session here next. So we have citizens' comments, and we do have somebody signed up. So I will say we have two policies on the agenda, and Mr. Welch has asked that we amend the philosophy statement in item FF, that I left off a Y in the word ever. It should be every. And the last word in the philosophy statement he has proposed should be request, which is more appropriate than what I accidentally had obligation. So I would ask that we approve the policy with his suggestions, as well as policy CHA.
So move.
Second.
Ready for the vote?
All right, seeing no hands, let's take a roll call vote.
Richard Welch.
Yes.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
Melvoyd Benson.
No.
Don Biscardi.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Yes.
William Mudge.
Need more information.
This is a second reading, and so we're amending the second reading for FF.
Correct.
We haven't approved the second reading, though, yet, have we?
That's what you're voting on.
now.
That's what you're voting on. You're voting on the second reading for approval.
Take note.
As amended.
Correct.
I'm going to vote no on that.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-2.
All right, that brings us to citizens' comments. I'm not sure who signed up, but feel free to come up to the mic. Cheryl Dowling.
Handouts that I'd like to pass out first.
Bring them down here to our Lorraine Berglund, and she can make sure that they're passed down to us.
Full of fun.
And Ms. Dowling, we will give you 3 minutes as soon as, but why don't you wait until the handouts are out before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I only had 12 handouts, so I don't
I
know.
think we all have a copy.
Okay, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Dowling. I'm a parent of 3 children in the North Kingstown school system. Sorry, I'm not a public speaker, so I am here to request that you reinstitute Rosh Hashanah as a holy day on the school calendar. My oldest child is a senior, and as far back as I can remember, my kids have always had Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur off from school. Last year, Rosh Hashanah was taken away to make up for one of the Hurricane Irene days that we had off. No tests, quizzes, or new material were to be given on that day. A Jewish friend of mine told me that her son said to her, "We rate less than a snow day." How sad is that? This year, Rosh Hashanah was not even listed on the school calendar, which I have a copy of. In the North Kingstown Student Handbook on page 18, it states, "The Jewish high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur will be appropriately marked on the official school calendar. To the extent practical, no new work, testing, or any unique school events will be scheduled for the evening prior to the day of those observations." I know for a fact that tests and quizzes and homework were given out to kids on Rosh Hashanah. What message are we sending to our children when even our own administration and teachers don't follow the policies as outlined in the handbook? The Jewish children were told they needed to make up their tests and quizzes after school. If they participate in sports, they would miss practice. I know at least some of the coaches rule that if you miss practice, you are not allowed to play the next game. One child I know opted to take the quiz during lunchtime and missed his lunch so he wouldn't miss practice. Children are being penalized for being Jewish. This is wrong. It also states in the student handbook on page 3, it is the policy of the North Kingstown School Department not to discriminate on the basis of age, sex, race, religion, etc. You are discriminating against children in our school system because they are Jewish. Our religious freedom is under attack in our country. An example of this happened right in our state recently. One person complained about a banner that had been hanging in a Rhode Island school for decades, and they had that removed. Our state was founded by Roger Williams on religious freedom. Now, I am not Jewish. I am Catholic. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are not my religious holidays. They are the holy days of our Jewish brothers and sisters. Sorry. There was an interesting article this past week in the Standard Times about the 2 Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I've made copies for you to read. I hope you take the time to read it. I would like to read the first paragraph for you now. To all the school children that ask, "Why do I have this day off? I am not Jewish," the answer is, can you imagine having to go to school on Christmas or Easter? That is how the Jewish people feel about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. These 2 Jewish holy days go hand in hand like Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Even though the Jewish families are a minority in our school system, they still deserve the same respect as we Christians do. I would like to point out another article that was recently in the Providence Journal. I also made copies of this article for you to read. It is about the Barrington school system. It is titled, "School Calendar Offers Lessons in Diversity." The first paragraph says, "At a time when hostilities are high in the Middle East, one school district is trying to do something to further religious tolerance. We need to continue religious tolerance in our school system as well." One of the Barrington Committee school members said in the article, "This is America. This is a melting pot. We're all about religious freedom." He also said that this is a teachable moment, an opportunity to remind students that no single religion is more exalted than another. It is important to have these 2 Jewish holy days off. My daughter has a friend who is Jewish, and she did not want to miss school last Monday. She went to school, but said that if the day was off on the calendar, she would have gone to temple. We shouldn't make the Jewish children and their families choose between going to school and going to worship, as it states in this article. If you're wondering why there are no Jewish families here tonight to speak to you on this issue, it is because Yom Kippur began at sundown tonight. In closing, I would like to say that North Kingstown has given these 2 holy days for years. They've given those days off, except for these past 2 years. We need to return to the ways of the past in this situation. North Kingstown has a lot to be proud of. We have improved test scores and are ranked number 4 in the state. We should also be proud to say, like Barrington, that we uphold religious freedom and are equal to Christians and Jews alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dowling.
Thank you.
Good evening. Louis Cahoon, 25 Pineland Street, North Kingstown. As a long member of the North Kingstown School Department, 40 years, okay, I never had the opportunity to come to the school committee meetings because there was really no need to. People tell me now, you should go. It's quite a spectacle. And what I saw tonight is exactly that, okay? Not one of you, not 2 of you, but all of you, right? Between the snickering, the arrogance, I don't think there's any need for that. I know you lose your patience. I probably would too, okay? But once again, you're a committee who is here to look out for the best for our children and give them the best education they have. And I believe that's what you all have in heart. Sometimes you do not show it. And I think tonight was one of them. Okay. I'll get right off of that, and I'll go into goals. I like the goals. Okay. 5 years ago, I was told you have to set 3 goals. It was set by my director. I set them. He was the one who rated it. Okay. The superintendent told the director, I want 3 goals out of you. So, the directors submit 3 goals to the superintendent, which will be rated by the superintendent. Superintendent has 3 goals, okay, that should be submitting to you. And you should rate him on those 3 goals. Now, school committee goals. Why don't we just pick 3? In common, all 7 of you, 3 goals. Okay? You pick them. Okay? You put them down. But you know what? We, the people, should be rating you on your performance. Okay? Last of all is termination of the supervisor. I'm not going to go into it because I know we can't. One thing I'd like you all to know, that this is a person who spent 20-some good years with the school department. Whether or not she's capable of doing this job, I don't know. I'm not going to voice on that. But should there be some other way? If she did a good job for 20-some years, to defend another job for her instead of a termination. So what I'm asking you to do is lead not with your minds, also have some heart. Okay? I'm sorry, but that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Excuse me, before you leave, sir, and anybody else is left, I'd like to make a sincere apology to Mr. Mudge and to everybody out there. I was totally unprofessional. I was totally out of line, and I will do my best to make it not happen again. I apologize to everybody.
Thank you. I'd like to applaud that.
We have another. Is that?
Yeah. Daddy.
I'm Walter Cattell, 576 Lafayette Road. And like Mr. Cahoon, I spent well over 30 years with the school department in the central office. In fact, I go back so far, I started in the brick building up next to the Pizza House on 10 Rod Road. But I wanted to speak to you concerning your evaluation of transportation. I have no problem with the evaluation of transportation. I received some phone calls about it. They asked me about it, and I said I would help out if I could. There's no cost involved, nothing. My concern, I think, is $4,000. Look at a company, and what are you going to get for $4,000? That's not a man on site for a day. I know what I was paying when I left 11 years ago for that type of service. And probably the thing that concerns me more than that is you're bringing in another company who's in the same business of providing scheduling information to evaluate another scheduler. Would we bring Apple in to evaluate our Dell computers or Hewlett Packard to evaluate them? I think it should be an independent company who can look at the whole scene. And believe me, I don't know what they're going to evaluate, what they mean by an audit. Are we looking at stops? Are we looking at routes, number of buses, or what? But there isn't going to be much that they can do. And $4,000 to give you any type of report that's going to help you solve the problems you have. If you people, and most of you do, I think, remember back when we went from the kindergarten 3, 4, 5, as you know, I redid school boundaries for you people at no cost then, and those boundaries were the ones that Mr. Horan is using. I sat on the panel that hired John. I worked with John when we were training, came in and helped him many, many times. However, I think you're throwing money away. Really, there's got to be, do it, but do it with somebody independent, somebody who's not trying to get in here to learn the routes so they can bid on it possibly next year. We all know how well Transport did with state transportation last year, and I don't think it's squared away yet. Thank you.
I have a motion to
Recess.
adjourn into
Recess.
executive session. And a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, we will go into executive session. Thank you.
Thank you.